The $800 billion stimulus bill 2 years ago, Judge, as you know, you and I have talked about this many times, it didn't create a single new job because government spending doesn't create jobs. And now they have to revert to tax cuts. I agree with Charlie. This is essential that we get this done, that we keep capital gains and dividend taxes where they are. I want to say one thing, if I may, on this issue of the earmarks.
Go ahead.
I agree that it's a small part of the budget, but you know what? The way they're going to bully through this obscene spending bill is by buying off Republican senators with pork projects.
You are
and that's why pork is so terrible.
You are exactly right. I think that Steve Moore is exactly right. This is a Christmas tree ornament, and it is virtually a bribe to get members of Congress to vote for it. We'll give you this for your district. You vote for us on the other bill.
And it always works.
I thought you were going to be outraged.
You know, so cheaply.
We've defined deviancy down. I'm sorry, I'm not as outraged as I once was at this stuff.
Yeah, Tom, are we saddled forever with a government like this that takes back with one hand what it is given with the other? Is this just the nature of the beast? Or will Washington change when the Tea Party folks get there in 3 weeks?
I would love to believe that, Judge, so much. But what I suspect will happen is that we'll probably continue along the same spending trajectory until the House of Cards comes down and we sort of get religion, so to speak, at that point. I fear that that's what it's going to take. But I think that that moment will be the moment that we can, in fact, renew the pledge of what America is. That it could be that bankruptcy is the best thing that ever happened to this country.
Wow. Charlie Gasparino, Steve Moore, Tom Woods, thanks very much for joining us. Ahead, Glenn Beck and advice from his mentor. Next. Last night, Glenn broadcast a special program from Wilmington, Ohio, a town devastated when DHL, Wilmington's major employer, left. The town did not shut down. Neighbors helped neighbors. People prayed for food to show up in the food pantry. Glenn's message that Wilmington should not be pitied, it should be imitated. Glenn even spoke to a woman who made a deal on a handshake. It may sound crazy, but a very successful person has some of the same beliefs. Glenn recently sat down with self-made billionaire John Huntsman Sr. Take a look.
There's one man in my life who has been a mentor of biblical proportions, John Huntsman. He is a guy who gives me the confidence to know that you don't have to cut corners. You can make ethical decisions, and even if it seems like you lose at the time, you'll win. A guy who really truly believes that a handshake is enough. Look a man in the eye and shake his hand. I think that's the kind of country that we, most of us at least, want to be. He is the founder and the executive chairman of the Huntsman Corporation, the founder of the Huntsman Cancer Institute, and author of the book that you must read, Winners Never Cheat. John, I want to take you to, there was never a time when you thought, you know, I'm just going to cut this corner. I'm just going to cut this corner. I'm just going to compromise here.
Well, you've asked me a question, Glenn, about cutting corners, but I have to say something that may be way out of whack and way out of place, but one of the finest men I've ever met in my life is Glenn Beck.
Stop. See, he's avoiding the question. He's obviously cut corners.
Listen. Your audience doesn't know this. I've been fishing with you, Glenn. I've been in the mountains with you. I've been alone with you. You and I have had discussions on everything from religion to space to families. We've cried together. We've laughed together. And you're one of the finest, sweetest, good men, Glenn Beck, I've ever met.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Huntsman, you have avoided the question. Because you told me the story of Shell, which cost you how much money when you were selling was it to Shell? You were selling part of your chemical company to Shell.
It was to Great Lakes Chemical Company,
okay.
Yes.
And you had agreed on a price. You shook hands on a deal.
Correct.
Can you tell the story?
Well, I can. I don't want to sound self-serving, Glenn, but in a nutshell, I used to sell a part of my business about every 3 or 4 years, and then I'd buy it back again when things were good. And with this one occasion, I sold 40% of our company. And the business was quite large at this time, so I sold 40% of it, and we agreed on a price of $54 million. I sold it to Great Lakes Chemical Company, a company headquartered in West Lafayette, Indiana. And it took about 6 months for the legal people, the lawyers, to get around to the contracts, and by the time they got around to the contracts, the prices of our petrochemicals and other products had gone straight up, and the value of that 40% piece of our business was now worth $250 million because earnings had increased dramatically.
And you had just shook hands with him. You had no contract, $54 million.
We shook hands on day one. Emerson Campen, who was our CEO, and I shook hands. So he came back to me after the 6 months and said, you know, it's been 6 months. It's been my fault. My attorneys didn't move fast enough. I'll tell you what I'll do, John. The business has gone up dramatically. Let's split the difference between $54 million and $250 million. And you get, let's say it's $125 million, and I'll pay you that much because you're certainly entitled to more than $54 million. And I said, no, Emerson, you don't understand. We shook hands. I mean, you know, all I expect is $54 million. And in my heart of hearts, I never thought about anything beyond $54 million.
Isn't it people like, there's no one around you going, John, shut up?
Well, probably a few. I mean, but, you know, it just never occurred. It wasn't something that you thought about. Or
How do you teach that, John? How do you teach that? I know that you give a lot of money to, like, the Wharton School of Business, and I believe business schools are having a hard time teaching ethics. They don't even understand. People don't even understand. You'll say, is this good or is this good? And they'll say, well, this makes more money. This is good. Well, no, that's not ethical. How do you teach it?
Well, first of all, I had shaken his hand. And secondly, I'd made an agreement with him. And it was embodied in my own head that an agreement's an agreement. And he never got over it. He never got over it. In fact, when he passed away, his wife had me speak at his funeral, along with the governor of Indiana, Evan Bayh. And but people said, well, that's so unusual. And I said, no, it's not. What's unusual about being honest? I mean, it isn't that I'm trying to sound self-serving or anything like that. I wasn't at all. It was just that when you know, there's just an ethical aspect about life that if we're straight with each other, then we're straight with our God, and we're straight with our family, and we're straight with our wife and our children. And
you don't believe he's telling a lie in his personal life, but his personal life doesn't matter. This is business. You don't believe in that.
Well, you can't operate under two standards.
You can't operate under two standards. Tomorrow on the program, Glenn's special from Wilmington. What you did not see on a television. That's tomorrow night at 5 p.m. Next, WikiLeaks founder is out of jail on bail. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange released on bail in London just a few hours ago. Assange wanted by prosecutors to answer their questions about an alleged sexual assault in Sweden. Here's what he had to say.
Well, it's great to smell fresh air of London again. First, some thank yous to all the people around the world who have had faith in me, who have supported my team while I have been away.
He has lots of support and lots of critics, but did he commit a crime? With me now, senior editor of Reason magazine, Catherine Mangu Ward, and nationally syndicated radio talk host and Fox News contributor, Leslie Marshall. Leslie, to you first. Do you think that there is a basis to charge him in American law for his dissemination of documents that he received, bearing in mind the Pentagon Papers case, bearing in mind the manner in which the Supreme Court has treated the First Amendment, bearing in mind the special protection the First Amendment gives for journalists in our society today?
Well, Judge, you certainly know the Constitution and the law better than I, but I have to tell you this. I don't, when I read, and I reread it this morning knowing we talk about it today,
right.
The First Amendment does not say that we have freedom of the press unless we share with the world information that could bode negatively on the American people, our soldiers, diplomats, even put us in danger, etc. He is as a journalist, even though he calls himself an anarchist, he is a journalist, and the First Amendment does cover him. So with the First Amendment, no, I don't think think any charges should be brought against him, even though I feel his actions were irresponsible and reprehensible.
Catherine, does it appear as though the charges from Sweden are a pretext, or were a pretext, to keep him in jail for a period of time in the hopes that American prosecutors could have filed some charge so that as soon as he got out of the British jail, he'd be locked up again with the Americans wanting him? Now, that didn't happen. The reason it didn't happen, in my view, is because Leslie's has just explained the law to us. But do you see the hand of the American State Department behind all this stuff that's going on in London? Because the Swedish charges were dismissed by another prosecutor back in August when they were first filed.
If the State Department's behind it, I guess we'll have to hope that Assange can find a cache of cables about it to release a little bit later on. But honestly, I mean, if Assange is by soliciting and releasing information that the U.S. government would rather keep secret, if he's a criminal, then so are we on Fox News right now. So is Reason Magazine. What he's doing is what a good investigative reporter on a national security beat should be doing. He's cultivating sources. He's making it easy to share.
Leslie, many of the things that we learned have not been denied. I mean, no one has claimed that these are phony documents, that he made this up. So, for example, things like Secretary of State Hillary Clinton instructed special agents in the State Department to steal the credit card numbers of foreign diplomats so she could know what restaurants they were going to. I mean, if that is true, that is a crime for which both Mrs. Clinton and those who stole the credit card numbers could be prosecuted, not by this administration, but by another administration. Shouldn't we know if the government is committing a crime, albeit a petty one, in our names and with our authority?
Well, Judge, I think you know that for years we were committing many crimes. They were called torture.
Yes.
And credit card numbers, although illegal, yes, petty. Do we want transparency, and at what cost? The American people say they want transparency. Here's transparency. What bothers me, Judge, is why are we just talking about Assange? What about somebody who violated a military code of justice and perhaps threw his comrades under the bus, literally, who are fighting overseas with providing Assange with this information?
All right. Catherine, Leslie raises a very good issue, and it's another issue about government trust. The government claims that over 1 million pages of documents were stolen by one buck private. Now, I have difficulty believing that the buck private had a security clearance, had the ability to get these things, got all of them, and distributed them on his own. But the government, which has kept him locked up for 23 hours a day for the past 6 months, claims that he and he alone did this. Do you believe that?
I think that the more that government clamps down on information, the more information is denied to the public, the more Assanges and the more Bradley Mannings there are going to be. Bradley Manning may or may not have released these documents. I have no way to know. You're certainly right, Judge, that he is getting very, very harsh treatment right now. He's getting the kind of treatment that we mostly reserve for convicted murderers with discipline problems in jail.
Right.
But, you know, this is also, it's just hoisted on their own petards. I mean, FOIA requests were filed for a lot of the information that Assange wound up disclosing and were denied. And if those requests have been granted, I'm not sure that that Assange would be the hero, anti-hero that he is today for so many in the transparency world.
Leslie, the three of us are journalists. We are opinion people. We don't just state the news down the middle. We say what we think about it. In the long run, isn't it a good thing when we know what the government has done, even if it has lied, even if it has cheated, even if it has stolen, even if it has killed in our name? As mature adults in a functioning Western democracy, isn't it better that we know these things than that we don't know them?
Not all of it. And I would say, because honestly, as an American, as somebody who practices what I do professionally under the First Amendment, and a woman in this world, in this country, who can do that, I don't want to know the secret dealings of leaders in our country with others, especially if it's going to infringe upon the safety of our soldiers or of perhaps capturing somebody like Osama bin Laden. So I would say there's a line in the sand, and I don't want that crossed.
Okay, but the other side of that line says that he can legitimately and lawfully release this because the First Amendment of the Supreme Court has said so. Guys, thanks very much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Judge.
Net neutrality could be coming to a computer near you, to your computer, sooner than you think.